The autumn wind cut through Quinton Irving's worn coat as he guided his horse along the ridge overlooking the valley, searching for strays that had wandered from his herd. When movement near a small cabin caught his eye, and he saw a woman struggling to drag a fallen branch twice her size across the frozen ground. He reined in his mare and watched for a moment, noting how the woman's breath came in visible puffs of effort, how her slight frame seemed ill-equipped for the task she had set herself. The cabin behind her looked weathered but maintained, smoke curling weakly from the chimney. It was late October 1883, and winter in eastern Washington Territory came early and stayed late. That meager woodpile beside her cabin would not last a month, let alone see her through until spring. Quinton had been alone on his ranch for 3 years now, ever since his brother had headed to California chasing gold dreams that would likely never materialize. The silence of his own homestead had become oppressive, the evenings long and empty. He had grown accustomed to his own company, to conversations with his cattle and his aging dog, but something about seeing this woman struggle stirred something in his chest he had thought long dormant. He nudged his horse forward, down the slope toward the cabin. The woman looked up at the sound of hooves, her hand moving instinctively to shade her eyes against the autumn sun. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that held both wariness and determination. "Afternoon, madam," Quinton called out, removing his hat as he approached. "Name is Quinton Irving. I have the ranch about 5 miles north of here." The woman straightened, wiping her hands on her worn apron. "Tabitha Foster," she replied, her voice carrying a slight breathlessness from her exertion. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Irving? Actually, I was thinking the opposite." He nodded toward the branch she had been dragging. "That is not going to be near enough wood for winter. Storm is coming in a few days by the look of those clouds. You have anyone helping you prepare?" Tabitha's jaw tightened slightly, and Quinton recognized pride when he saw it. He had plenty of it himself. "I manage well enough on my own." "I appreciate your concern, but I have been doing fine since my uncle passed last spring." "I meant no offense," Quinton said quickly, dismounting and holding his hat in his hands. "This land is hard on everyone, man or woman. I just know that come January, you will wish you had 10 times that wood stacked up. The cold here does not show mercy. And you are offering your services out of the goodness of your heart?" Tabitha asked, skepticism coloring her tone. She had learned to be cautious of men bearing gifts. Her uncle had warned her before he died that not everyone who offered help did so without expectation of payment she might not wish to give. Quinton met her gaze steadily. "I am offering because I know what it is to struggle alone, and because I know that this land kills people who are not prepared for winter. Nothing more sinister than that, Miss Foster. You have my word." Something in his tone, in the directness of his gray eyes, made Tabitha pause. She had been managing on her own for 6 months now, ever since Uncle Henry's heart had given out while he was mending the fence. The neighboring families were scattered and distant, and those who had stopped by had either offered help with strings attached or had problems enough of their own. This man, this Quinton Irving, seemed different somehow, though she could not say exactly why. "I cannot pay you," she said finally. "I have a bit put by, but winter supplies take most of it." "Did not ask for payment," Quinton replied. He looked around the property, assessing it with a practiced eye. "You have about 2 acres of timber back there, good mixed hardwood, some pine. I can spend a few days cutting and splitting, get you set up proper." "A few days," Tabitha repeated, surprise evident in her voice. "That is considerable work, Mr. Irving. I cannot accept such charity." "Not charity. Call it being neighborly." He turned back to his horse and began untying his bedroll. I will camp out here, start first thing in the morning. That acceptable to you?" Tabitha found herself nodding before she had fully thought it through. "There is a lean-to behind the cabin. It is not much, but it is better than sleeping on the ground. And I suppose I can spare supper if you are going to be working." "That would be much appreciated, Miss Foster." Quinton's weathered face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. "I will earn that supper. I promise you that." That evening, as Tabitha prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of her salted pork, she found herself watching through the window as Quinton tended to his horse and made camp in the lean-to. He moved with the economical grace of someone long accustomed to physical labor, every motion purposeful and efficient. She judged him to be in his early 30s, perhaps 5 or 6 years older than herself, with the kind of lean strength that came from years of ranch work rather than any natural bulk. When she called him in for supper, he washed thoroughly at the pump outside and entered her small cabin with his hat in his hands, his hair still damp and combed back. "This is fine," he said, looking around the cabin's single room. "You keep a good home." "It was my uncle's," Tabitha replied, setting the plates on the small table. "He brought me out here 5 years ago after my parents died of fever in Missouri. I thought I would hate it at first, all this emptiness and silence, but it grew on me." They sat across from each other at the table, and Tabitha found the silence less awkward than she had expected. Quinton ate with good appetite, but without the rough manners some men displayed. He complimented her cooking sincerely, and when she apologized for the meal's simplicity, he shook his head. "This is better than anything I cook for myself," he said. "I can manage basics, but I have never had the knack for making food taste like anything more than fuel." "You never married?" Tabitha asked, then immediately colored at her own boldness. "Forgive me, that was too forward." "No offense taken. And no, I never did. Came close once back in Kansas before my brother and I headed west. She decided she did not want the rancher's life after all, married a shopkeeper instead." He said it without bitterness, merely as fact. "And you?" "No. There was someone back in Missouri, but after my parents died and I came out here, well, distance has a way of ending things even without words." Tabitha looked down at her plate. "And out here there are not many prospects. The few single men around are either too old, too young, or too fond of whiskey." "Spokane is growing," Quinton offered. "More people settling the area every year. Town has a new church, even a schoolhouse now." "I know. I go in once a month for supplies, but I am not sure I am looking for anyone. I have grown used to managing on my own." Even as she said it, Tabitha felt the loneliness that had become her constant companion, especially during the long evenings when the silence pressed in from all sides. Quinton nodded, seemingly understanding more than she had said. "There is a difference between managing and living, I think. I manage fine on my own too. But some days I catch myself talking to the cattle just to hear a voice, even if it is my own." The honesty in his admission surprised her, and Tabitha found herself smiling. "I do the same with my chickens. I have even named them all. I suppose that makes me foolish." "Makes you human," Quinton said simply. After supper, Quinton returned to the lean-to, and Tabitha cleaned the dishes, her thoughts in unusual turmoil. She had grown so accustomed to solitude that having another person near felt both strange and comforting. She told herself not to read too much into his kindness, that he was simply a decent man doing a neighborly thing, nothing more. But as she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the cabin's corners, she could not help but feel a small warmth at knowing someone else was nearby, that for a few days at least, she would not face the world entirely alone. Quinton was true to his word. By the time Tabitha emerged from the cabin at dawn, He had already sharpened his axe and was surveying the timber stand behind her property. She brought him coffee and a plate of fried eggs and biscuits, which he accepted gratefully. "Going to start with that dead oak," he said, gesturing to a massive fallen tree at the edge of the timber. "That will give you good hardwood for the coldest months. Then I will work through the standing dead pine. Want to leave the live trees for future years." "You have thought this through," Tabitha observed. "Spent enough winters in this territory to know what works. Wood management is as important as water or grazing land. You do it wrong, you pay for it when the snow flies." He worked steadily through the morning, and the rhythmic sound of his axe biting into wood became a kind of music. Tabitha went about her own chores, tending the chickens, working in her small vegetable garden to prepare it for winter, mending a hole in the cabin's roof that had been leaking. But she found her attention drawn again and again to the figure in the timber, to the rise and fall of the axe, to the growing pile of cut logs. Around midday, she brought him lunch and water. He had removed his shirt despite the chill, and she could see the muscles of his back and shoulders working as he split the logs he had cut. Sweat gleamed on his skin, and she looked away quickly, feeling heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with exertion. "You are making good progress," she said, setting the food on a stump. Quinton buried the axe in a log and reached for his shirt, pulling it on before turning to her. "Should have a decent amount done by nightfall. Tomorrow I will start splitting and stacking. Day after I can finish up and make sure it is all properly stored." 3 days, Tabitha said. "You really meant it." "I do not say things I do not mean, Miss Foster." They ate together in the dappled shade of the timber, and Tabitha found conversation flowing more easily than it had the night before. He told her about his ranch, about the herd of cattle he was trying to build, about his hopes of expanding if the next few seasons went well. She told him about her uncle's dreams for this property, about her own uncertain plans for the future. "Did you ever think about selling?" Quinton asked. "Moving back east or into town?" "Every day at first," Tabitha admitted. "But this land grows on you, and it is mine, truly mine. Back east, I would always be dependent on someone else, working for wages or hoping to marry well. Here, I have something of my own, even if it is hard. I understand that. It is why I will likely die out here, stubbornly trying to make a go of it even when easier options exist." He smiled at himself. "My brother used to say I had more determination than sense. Is he still in California? Last letter I got, about 8 months back. He is working a claim near Sacramento, convinced he is about to strike it rich. I hope he does, though I doubt it. Most men who go chasing gold just find hard work and disappointment." Quinton's expression grew distant. "But he had to try. That is just who he is." Tabitha heard the affection in his voice and the loneliness too. "You miss him." "More than I expected to, truth be told. We argued plenty, but he was company. Good company when he was not driving me to distraction with his schemes and dreams. It sounds like you loved him very much, still do, just from a distance now." The afternoon wore on, and Tabitha returned to her own work, but she found her spirits lighter than they had been in months. Just having another presence nearby, hearing the sounds of productive labor, made the world seem less empty and cold. That evening, she made a better supper than the night before, using some of her carefully hoarded supplies to make a venison stew with root vegetables, and biscuits with a bit of honey. She told herself it was simply proper hospitality, but she knew she wanted to see that smile again, wanted to hear his voice across the table. Quinton's eyes lit up when he saw the meal. "Miss Foster, you are going to spoil me. I will not want to go back to my own cooking after this." "It is the least I can do, considering the work you are doing." "I would do the work for far less," he said, then seemed to catch himself. a faint color rising in his weathered cheeks. They ate and talked, and the conversation ranged from practical matters to deeper subjects. Quinton spoke of his parents, long dead, and the farm in Kansas where he had grown up. Tabitha told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's love of music and her father's patience and kindness. They discovered shared experiences despite different details, the common ground of loss and resilience, and the strange hope that kept people going in difficult circumstances. After supper, Quinton lingered longer than he had the previous night, helping her wash the dishes despite her protests. They stood side by side at her small counter, and Tabitha was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his forearms looked as he dried the plates with methodical care. "I want to thank you properly," Tabitha said as they finished, "for all this. It is more kindness than I have known in a long while. You do not need to thank me. Honestly, these past 2 days have been good for me too. I had forgotten what it was like, having someone to talk to at day's end, someone who talks back with more sense than my dog Rufus anyway." His smile was warm and genuine. "So really, we are helping each other." After he left for the lean-to, Tabitha sat by her fire for a long time, watching the flames dance and feeling things she had thought long buried beginning to stir. She told herself to be sensible, that he was simply being kind, that he would finish his work and return to his own ranch and life would go back to the way it had been. But she did not entirely convince herself, and she was not entirely sure she wanted to. The third day dawned cold and clear, with frost painting the world silver. Quinton was already up and working when Tabitha brought him his breakfast. The pile of split wood had grown impressively, and he was now engaged in the task of stacking it properly against the side of the cabin, arranging it to allow air circulation while keeping it protected from snow and rain. "You know your craft," Tabitha said, admiring the neat rows taking shape. "My father taught me. He used to say that how a man stacks his wood tells you everything about his character. Do it sloppy and it will fall and rot. Do it right and it will serve you all winter long." He sounds like he was a wise man. He was stern but fair. He loved the land, loved the work. I think he would have liked it out here if he had lived long enough to see it. They fell into an easy rhythm, Quinton working on the woodpile while Tabitha handled her own tasks. But now they worked in comfortable proximity, exchanging words now and then, sharing small moments of humor or observation. It felt natural, as if they had been doing this for years rather than days. By late afternoon, the work was nearly complete. The woodpile stood tall and solid, enough to see Tabitha through even a harsh winter with wood to spare. Quinton stood back, surveying his work with satisfaction. "That should do you well," he said. "Keep the snow cleared away from the base and it will stay dry all winter." "I will. Thank you, Mr. Irving. I mean that sincerely." Tabitha looked at the woodpile, then at him. "I could never have managed this on my own. You would have found a way. You strike me as someone who does what needs doing, no matter how hard." He gathered his tools, preparing to pack them away. "I will head back to my place in the morning. Get out of your way." Something clenched in Tabitha's chest at those words, a sense of loss she had not expected to feel so keenly. "You have not been in my way. Quite the opposite, actually." Quinton paused in his work, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I have enjoyed these days, Miss Foster." "More than I expected to, truth be told." "Tabitha," she said impulsively. "You can call me Tabitha. I think we have moved past formalities." "Then you should call me Quinton." He smiled that transformative smile again. "Tabitha." The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. She smiled back, feeling suddenly shy. "I should start supper. Will you join me one last time?" "I would like that very much." That evening, Tabitha outdid herself, using the last of her precious coffee beans to make a cake, something she had not bothered with since her uncle's death. The cabin filled with warmth and good smells, and when Quinton came in from washing up, his eyes widened at the spread she had prepared. "This is too much," he protested. "You should not use up your supplies like this. I want to. Please let me do this." Tabitha met his eyes. "You have given me more than firewood these past days, Quinton. You have given me company and conversation and the feeling that I am not entirely alone in the world. That is worth far more than coffee and sugar." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. Quinton nodded slowly, taking his seat at the table. The meal was excellent, and they ate slowly, as if both reluctant to see the evening end. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams, fears and hopes. The cabin's single room seemed to shrink around them, the world outside fading away until there was just the warm circle of lamplight, the crackle of the fire, and the two of them. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleaned, they sat by the fire, Tabitha in her uncle's old chair and Quinton on a stool he had pulled over. The silence between them was comfortable but charged with something unspoken. "I have been thinking," Quinton said finally, his voice low, "about what you said about being alone. I have been alone for 3 years now, and I thought I had made peace with it. But these past days, being here with you, I have realized that I was not at peace. I was just enduring." Tabitha's heart began to beat faster. "I know what you mean. I told myself I was fine, that I did not need anyone, but I was lying to myself." Quinton turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense in the firelight. "I am not a man of fancy words, Tabitha. I am just a rancher trying to build something lasting in hard country. But I think you and we could build something together, something stronger than either of us could manage alone." "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Tabitha's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I am asking if you would consider marrying me." The words came out in a rush, as if he had to say them quickly or not at all. "I know it is sudden. I know we have only known each other 3 days. But sometimes you just know, do you not? Sometimes you meet someone and you can feel it, that they are meant to be part of your life." Tabitha stared at him, her mind reeling. It was absurd, impossible, completely impractical. They barely knew each other. People did not decide such things in 3 days. But even as these sensible thoughts ran through her head, her heart was saying something different. Her heart was reminding her of how right it had felt to have him near, how easily they talked, how the silence had seemed to retreat in his presence. Her heart was telling her that sometimes, when you had been alone in the cold for long enough, you recognized warmth when you finally felt it. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Yes, I will marry you, Quinton Irving." His expression transformed, joy lighting his weathered features like sunrise. "Truly, you mean it." "I mean it." "You are right. It is sudden and probably foolish, and everyone will think we have lost our minds. But I do not care. I have spent 6 months being sensible and practical and alone, and I am tired of it. I want to take a chance on something that feels right, even if it makes no logical sense." Quinton stood and closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. His palms were calloused and warm, strong and steady. "I promise you will not regret this. I will work hard for us, for our future. I will be a good husband to you." "And I will be a good wife to you," Tabitha replied, looking up into his eyes. "We will build something together, just like you said. Something lasting." He raised her hands to his lips and kissed them gently, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with sudden tears. Then he pulled her to her feet and into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and hearing the strong, steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the firelight, two lonely people who had found something precious and unexpected in each other. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling. "We should do this properly," Quinton said. "Go into Spokane, talk to the minister, have a real wedding." "When?" Tabitha asked. "As soon as possible, this week if Reverend Matthews can manage it. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." "Neither do I," Tabitha admitted. "Is that terribly forward of me?" "No more forward than me proposing after 3 days. I think we are past worrying about propriety." He grinned, looking younger than his years. "Though we should probably maintain separate sleeping arrangements until we are properly wed. I want to do right by you." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm but nodded. "You are staying tonight, though, not heading back in the dark." "I will stay. And tomorrow we can ride into Spokane together, make the arrangements." That night, as Tabitha lay in her bed and Quinton settled in the lean-to one final time, she felt as if her entire world had shifted on its axis. 3 days ago, she had been resigned to a solitary existence, to managing alone until age or accident or illness claimed her. Now she had a future bright with possibility, a partner to share the burdens and the joys. She knew there would be challenges ahead, that marriage was not some magical solution to all of life's difficulties. But she also knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she had made the right choice. Quinton Irving was a good man, and together they would build something strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for the 15-mile ride to Spokane. Tabitha dressed in her best outfit, a simple but well-made dress of deep blue wool that she had been saving for special occasions. She packed a few necessities in a small bag, closed up the cabin, and met Quinton outside where he had saddled both horses. "You look beautiful," he said, his admiration evident and genuine. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." He had shaved and combed his hair, and the rough rancher of the past days had given way to a man who looked ready for important business. They rode together through the crisp autumn morning, following the well-worn trail that led to Spokane. The town had grown considerably in recent years, transforming from a rough frontier settlement into a proper community with businesses, churches, and families. The railroad had reached Spokane in 1881, bringing more settlers and commerce, and the town hummed with the energy of growth and possibility. They reached Spokane by late morning and went directly to the church, a simple but sturdy wooden structure at the edge of the main street. Reverend Matthews, a kind-faced man in his 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes, greeted them warmly. "Mr. Irving, good to see you. It has been a while since you have been to services." "I know, Reverend, and I apologize for that. The ranch keeps me busy." Quinton gestured to Tabitha. "This is Miss Tabitha Foster. She has the homestead about 5 miles south of my place." "Ah, yes, Henry Foster's niece. I am so sorry for your loss, Miss Foster. Your uncle was a good man." The Reverend shook her hand kindly. "What brings you both to see me today?" "We want to be married, Reverend," Quinton said simply. "As soon as you can manage it." Reverend Matthews' eyebrows rose slightly. "Married? Well, that is wonderful news. When were you thinking? This week, if possible. We know it is sudden, but we are certain of our decision." The Reverend studied them both carefully, and Tabitha had the sense of being gently evaluated. "How long have you known each other?" 3 days, Tabitha said honestly, then hurried to explain. "I know how that sounds, Reverend, but sometimes you just know. And we are both of age, both independent. We are not acting rashly, despite appearances." 3 days is quite sudden," the Reverend said carefully. "Marriage is a sacred commitment, not something to be entered into lightly. I have seen too many hasty unions end in regret and heartache." "We understand your concern," Quinton said, But we are not children, Reverend. I am 32 years old and have been managing on my own for years. Tabitha has been running her homestead alone since her uncle passed. We know what hard work and commitment look like. We are not going into this blindly. Reverend Matthews was quiet for a moment, considering. Very well, I can see you are both sincere, but I would ask that you give it at least a week. Spend some more time together, make certain this is truly what you want. If after that week you are still of the same mind, I will marry you. Does that seem reasonable? Quinton looked at Tabitha and she nodded. A week seemed both impossibly long and reassuringly sensible. That is fair, Reverend. Thank you. Good. Come see me again this time next week, and we will make the arrangements. The Reverend smiled. And in the meantime, I encourage you to pray on this decision and to be honest with each other about your expectations and hopes for the marriage. The strongest unions are built on clear understanding and genuine affection. They thanked the Reverend and left the church, stepping back into the bustle of Spokane's Main Street. Quinton turned to Tabitha with a slight smile. Well, that went better than it might have. He could have refused outright. He seems like a wise man, and he is right. A week will give us time to be certain. Even as she said it, Tabitha felt no doubt in her heart. If anything, the meeting with the Reverend had only reinforced her conviction. Shall we get lunch at the hotel? Quinton suggested. Celebrate our engagement even if we have to wait a bit for the wedding. I would like that very much. They ate at the Spokane Hotel, a modest but respectable establishment that served good food at reasonable prices. Over plates of roast beef and potatoes, they talked about practical matters, about how they would combine their properties and manage both homesteads, about what they would need for the winter ahead. Your place is better set up than mine, Quinton admitted. The cabin is solid and the land is good. My ranch has the grazing land and the cattle, but the house is not much more than a glorified shack. I have been meaning to improve it, but it never seemed worth the effort when it was just me. We could spend winters at my cabin and use your place for the cattle operation, Tabitha suggested. At least until we can build something better. That makes sense. And come spring, we can work on expanding, building a proper house that is ours together. The way he said it, with such certainty about their shared future, made Tabitha's heart warm. After lunch, they visited the general store to stock up on supplies. Quinton insisted on purchasing several items Tabitha had been doing without, practical things like lamp oil and sugar, coffee and flour, as well as some small luxuries like ribbon and peppermint candies. You do not have to do this, Tabitha protested, as the shopkeeper wrapped the purchases. I know I do not have to. I want to. Let me provide for you, Tabitha. That is what a husband does. He said it quietly, meant only for her ears, and the simple declaration made her feel cared for in a way she had not experienced since her parents died. They also stopped at the land office to inquire about the legalities of combining their properties after marriage. The clerk, a fussy man with spectacles perched on his nose, explained the process and assured them it would be straightforward once they had their marriage certificate. By late afternoon, they were ready to head back. They rode in comfortable silence for the first few miles, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Quinton spoke. Are you having second thoughts? If you are, you can tell me. I would rather know now than have you feel trapped. Tabitha looked over at him, at his honest, weathered face and the concern in his eyes. No second thoughts. Are you? None whatsoever. I just wanted to make sure you felt the same. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand briefly. A quick squeeze of reassurance before the trail narrowed, and they had to ride single file. They reached Tabitha's cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Quinton helped her unload her supplies and carry them inside, then lingered in the doorway as if reluctant to leave. "I should head back to my place," he said. "Check on the cattle, make sure everything is in order, but I will come back tomorrow if that is all right with you." "More than all right, I would like that very much." Tabitha stepped closer, feeling bold. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Will you kiss me? Just once before you go, I want to know what that is like." Quinton's expression softened. He closed the distance between them, cupping her face gently in his calloused hands. "I have been wanting to do that since yesterday," he admitted, and then his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle and sweet, tentative at first and then deepening as they both relaxed into it. Tabitha felt warmth spread through her entire body, felt something fundamental shift and settle into place. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing a little faster. "That was nice," Tabitha said, then laughed at the inadequacy of the word. "Actually, that was wonderful." "It was," Quinton agreed, his voice slightly rough. "And there will be many more once we are properly married. But for now, I should go before I am tempted to forget my resolve about doing things right." He kissed her once more, quick and soft, then mounted his horse and rode off into the gathering dusk. Tabitha watched until he disappeared from sight, then went inside, touching her lips and smiling. The week that followed established a pattern that felt both new and strangely timeless. Each morning, Quinton would ride over from his ranch, arriving in time for breakfast. He would help Tabitha with the heavier chores around her property, mending fences and shoring up the barn, while she tended to her animals and managed the household tasks. They worked side by side, learning each other's rhythms and habits, discovering small compatibilities and navigating minor differences. In the afternoons, Quinton would return to his own ranch to check on his cattle and handle his own work, but he always came back in the evening for supper. They would eat together, talk for hours by the fire, and then he would reluctantly take his leave, riding back through the darkness to his own lonely cabin. On the third day of this routine, Tabitha rode with him to see his ranch. It was larger than her property, with good grazing land and a herd of about 50 head of cattle. The cabin, as he had warned her, was rough and utilitarian, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. "I see what you mean," Tabitha said, surveying the interior with a critical eye. "This is not built for comfort." "I built it myself when I first claimed this land," Quinton admitted. "I was more focused on speed than quality. It keeps the rain out and holds a fire, but that is about all you can say for it. We can improve it, though. Make it livable for when we need to be here for the cattle." Tabitha could see the potential, could envision shelves and curtains, a real bed instead of the rough bunk Quinton currently used. "And in a year or two, we can build something proper, a real house for a family." "A family," Quinton repeated, and his expression grew soft. "I would like that. Children, I mean. Do you want children?" "I do," Tabitha said. "I always imagined having a family back when I was young and thought such things were inevitable. Then life got hard and that dream seemed to slip away. But now, maybe it is possible again." "We will make it possible," Quinton promised. Together. They spent the afternoon at his ranch, and Tabitha met his dog Rufus, an aging border collie mix who had been Quinton's constant companion for years. The dog accepted her readily, seeming to sense that she was going to be a permanent part of his master's life. "He likes you," Quinton observed. "That is a good sign. Rufus is an excellent judge of character. I like him too. I have always wanted a dog, but Uncle Henry said we could not afford to feed one." She scratched behind Rufus's ears, and the dog leaned into her hand with obvious pleasure. On the ride back to her cabin that evening, with Rufus trotting alongside, Tabitha felt a deep sense of rightness about her decision. Every day with Quinton confirmed what her heart had known from the beginning. They fit together in ways both practical and profound, and she could easily imagine spending the rest of her life with this quiet, hard-working man who had wandered into her life at exactly the right moment. The week passed quickly, each day bringing them closer together. They talked about everything: their childhoods and losses, their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. Quinton told her about his years trying to build the ranch, about lean winters and good seasons, about the satisfaction of creating something from nothing. Tabitha shared her memories of her parents, the grief of losing them, and then losing her uncle, the strange combination of freedom and loneliness that came with independence. They also learned each other in smaller ways. Tabitha discovered that Quinton hummed while he worked, always the same tune though he did not seem aware he was doing it. Quinton learned that Tabitha talked to herself when she was concentrating, a running commentary that amused him greatly. She found out he was afraid of thunderstorms, a legacy from being caught in a tornado as a child. He learned she could not carry a tune to save her life, but sang anyway when she thought no one was listening. By the time the week ended and they rode back to Spokane to see Reverend Matthews, they knew each other better than many couples who had courted for months. The Reverend could see the difference in them, the easy familiarity and genuine affection, and he smiled as they entered his study. "Well, I can see that you have spent your week wisely," he said. "You look like a couple who have made their peace with their decision." "We have," Quinton confirmed. "We are more certain now than we were a week ago, if that is possible. Then I am happy to marry you." "When would you like the ceremony?" "As soon as you can arrange it," Tabitha said. "We have waited long enough." "Tomorrow afternoon, then, 2 o'clock here at the church. Will you have witnesses?" Quinton looked at Tabitha and she shrugged. They had not thought about witnesses, had been so focused on each other that practical details had slipped away. "We do not really have anyone," Quinton admitted. "My brother is in California and Tabitha does not have family nearby." "I can provide witnesses," the Reverend assured them. "My wife and our deacon. You will not be married without proper support." The next day, November 7th, 1883, dawned clear and cold. Tabitha dressed in her best dress and the new ribbon Quinton had bought her, which she wove through her dark hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand and saw a woman transformed. The worry lines that had been forming around her eyes had smoothed. She looked younger, happier, alive in a way she had not been in years. Quinton arrived mid-morning, dressed in clothes she had never seen him wear before, a proper suit that looked slightly out of place on his rancher's frame but dignified nonetheless. He stared at her when she opened the door, his expression one of wonder. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "I am the luckiest man in the territory, and I am the luckiest woman." Tabitha took his hand. "Are you ready for this?" "I have been ready since the moment I saw you struggling with that firewood," he replied. "Maybe even before that, if I am honest. Maybe I have been ready for you my whole life, just waiting for you to appear." They rode to Spokane together, Rufus following faithfully behind. The town was busy with afternoon commerce, people going about their daily lives, unaware that for two people, this was the most important day of their lives. At the church, Reverend Matthews met them with his wife Margaret, a plump, cheerful woman who immediately embraced Tabitha as if they were old friends. The deacon, a taciturn man named Samuel Worth, nodded his greeting and took his place as witness. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They stood before the Reverend in the quiet church, sunlight streaming through the plain windows, and spoke their vows to each other. Quinton's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish Tabitha, to provide for her and protect her, to be faithful in good times and bad. Tabitha's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made her own promises: to love and honor Quinton, to be his partner and helpmate, to stand by him through whatever life might bring. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Quinton kissed her gently, and Tabitha felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. Margaret Worth dabbed at her own eyes with a handkerchief, and even her stern husband was smiling. After the ceremony, Margaret insisted they stay for cake and coffee, which she had prepared in anticipation of the occasion. They sat in the Reverend's modest parlor and shared the simple wedding feast, and it felt right and good, this small celebration of their new union. "Where will you live?" Margaret asked as she refilled their coffee cups. "Tabitha's cabin through the winter," Quinton replied, his arm around his new wife's shoulders. "Then we will work on building something more permanent on my ranch come spring." "Henry Foster's old place is a good property," Reverend Matthews observed. "And Quinton, your ranch has excellent grazing land. Combined, you will have a solid foundation." "That is what we are hoping," Tabitha said. "We want to build something lasting." They left Spokane in the late afternoon, riding back through the gathering dusk as husband and wife. The world looked different somehow, brighter and more full of promise. When they reached the cabin, Quinton dismounted and lifted Tabitha down from her horse, holding her for a long moment before setting her feet on the ground. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irving," he said softly. "Welcome home, Mr. Irving," she replied, and they both laughed at the formality of it after everything they had shared. That night, they truly became husband and wife, discovering each other in the privacy of the cabin with tenderness and growing passion. Tabitha had been nervous, her knowledge of such matters limited to vague hints from married women and her own imagination. But Quinton was patient and gentle, mindful of her inexperience, and what might have been awkward became instead a deepening of their connection. Afterward, lying in the narrow bed with Quinton's arms around her, Tabitha felt a profound sense of peace. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. "Are you happy?" Quinton asked, his voice drowsy in the darkness. "More than I knew I could be," Tabitha replied honestly. "Are you?" "Happiest I have ever been in my life. I love you, Tabitha Irving. I should have said that before, but I am saying it now. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered back and felt him smile against her hair. They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, two people who had been alone finding comfort and joy in their newfound togetherness. The first months of their marriage established the rhythms that would define their life together. They divided their time between Tabitha's cabin, which they began calling simply home, and Quinton's ranch, where they spent a few days each week tending the cattle and maintaining the property. Winter came early and fierce that year, with blizzards that buried the valley in snow and winds that howled like living things around the cabin walls. But the woodpile Quinton had cut stood tall and solid, keeping them warm through even the coldest nights. As they sat by the fire on those long winter evenings, Tabitha would often think about that first day, about how a simple act of kindness had changed both their lives so completely. They learned to work as a team, each bringing their own strengths to the partnership. Quinton handled the heavy labor and managed the cattle, while Tabitha kept the household running and tended the chickens and the small animals. But they also helped each other freely, Quinton learning to cook basic meals so Tabitha was not solely responsible for feeding them. Tabitha learning to help with the cattle and ranch work when an extra pair of hands was needed. There were adjustments, of course. Learning to share space with another person after years of solitude was not always easy. Quinton's habit of leaving his boots exactly where anyone might trip over them drove Tabitha to distraction, until she finally insisted he keep them by the door. Tabitha's tendency to rearrange things in search of better organization sometimes meant Quinton could not find his tools when he needed them. But they learned to communicate, to express frustrations gently, and work through small conflicts before they became large ones. By midwinter, it felt as if they had been married for years rather than months. The initial passion of their union had settled into something deeper and more sustainable, a profound affection and partnership that only strengthened as the weeks passed. One evening in late January, as snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled cheerfully, Tabitha looked up from the shirt she was mending to find Quinton watching her with an expression of such tender contentment that it took her breath away. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year ago, how much better it is, how grateful I am that I happened to ride past your place that day." He set aside the harness he had been repairing and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. "You have made me happier than I ever thought possible, Tabitha. I hope you know that." She set aside her mending and cupped his face in her hands. "I do know it, because you have done the same for me. I was so lonely before you came, Quinton. I did not even realize how lonely until suddenly I was not anymore." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and she thought about how much could change in such a short time, how life could surprise you when you least expected it. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, they began making plans for the future. Quinton wanted to expand his herd, to build the ranch into something substantial enough to support a family. Tabitha wanted to enlarge her garden, to preserve enough food to see them through the next winter with plenty to spare. "And we should start thinking about the house," Quinton said one morning as they ate breakfast. "Once the ground thaws enough to dig a foundation, I want to begin building. Something solid, with real rooms. A proper kitchen for you, and a bedroom, and maybe a room that could be a nursery someday." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm at the mention of a nursery. They had not discussed children directly since before their marriage, though the possibility hung unspoken between them. "Someday soon, perhaps," she said carefully. Quinton looked at her sharply, hope dawning in his eyes. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I think I might be expecting," Tabitha admitted. "I am not entirely certain yet, but the signs are there. It is early still." The joy that lit his face made her heart swell. He was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and spinning her around, laughing with pure delight. "A baby." "We are going to have a baby. Careful," Tabitha laughed, steadying herself against his chest. "You will make me dizzy." He set her down gently, suddenly cautious, his hands going to her waist as if to protect the tiny life that might be growing there. "Are you well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" "I am fine, Quinton. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not going to break." But she was touched by his concern, by the immediate protectiveness in his response. "Still, you should not overdo things. I will handle more of the heavy chores." "We will see," Tabitha said diplomatically, knowing that trying to stop her from working would be like trying to hold back the tide. But she appreciated his care, his immediate desire to provide for and protect her and their potential child. The pregnancy was confirmed as the weeks passed, and Tabitha's body began to change in small but noticeable ways. Morning sickness plagued her for a few weeks, but Quinton was endlessly patient, bringing her dry toast and weak tea, holding her hair when she was sick, never complaining about the disruption to their routine. As spring advanced and the land shook off winter's grip, they began work on the new house. Quinton hired 2 men from Spokane to help with the heavy construction, and together they laid the foundation and began raising the frame. It was hard, exhausting work, but Quinton threw himself into it with single-minded determination. "I want it done before the baby comes," he told Tabitha. "I want us to be settled in our own home, our real home, when we become parents." Tabitha helped as much as she was able, providing meals for the work crew and handling lighter tasks. She watched the house take shape day by day, walls rising from the foundation, a roof going on to shelter them from the elements. It was larger than she had expected, with 2 proper bedrooms, a kitchen with space for a real stove, and even a small parlor. "It is wonderful," she told Quinton one evening as they stood looking at the nearly complete structure. "Better than I imagined." "Nothing is too good for you and our child," Quinton replied, his arm around her expanding waist. "This is just the beginning, Tabitha. We are going to build a good life here, you and I, a life our children will be proud of." By midsummer, the house was finished and they moved in, bringing their possessions from both the cabin and Quinton's old shack. The cabin they kept for storage and as a backup, but their main residence was now the new house on Quinton's ranch, where they could oversee the cattle and continue to expand their operation. Tabitha nested with increasing fervor as her pregnancy advanced, making the house into a home with curtains and carefully arranged furniture, with dishes on the shelves and quilts on the beds. The nursery received particular attention, painted a soft yellow and furnished with a cradle Quinton had built with his own hands. In early September 1884, almost exactly a year after Quinton had first seen Tabitha struggling with firewood, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Margaret Worth, who had experience as a midwife, and there were moments when Quinton, pacing outside in the darkness, feared he might lose either his wife or child or both. But Tabitha was strong, and as dawn broke over the mountains, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a powerful set of lungs and his father's gray eyes. When Margaret finally let Quinton into the bedroom, he found Tabitha exhausted but radiant, cradling their son against her chest. "Meet your son," she said softly, her voice hoarse from her exertions. Quinton approached almost reverently, staring down at the tiny red face of his child. When Tabitha placed the baby in his arms, he cradled the infant carefully, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness and love that surged through him. "He is perfect," Quinton whispered. "You are amazing. You did this. You brought him into the world." "We did it together," Tabitha corrected gently. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Quinton said, "James, after my father. James Henry Irving, after both our fathers." "James Henry," Tabitha repeated, testing the name. "I like that." "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The baby squirmed in his father's arms and let out a plaintive cry. Quinton quickly handed him back to Tabitha, who began to nurse him with Margaret's patient guidance. In the days that followed, they adjusted to life as new parents. Sleep became a precious commodity as James made his needs known at all hours. Tabitha was sore and exhausted, and Quinton did everything he could to help, taking over all the household tasks and tending to James whenever possible so Tabitha could rest. But despite the challenges, there was also profound joy. Watching Tabitha nurse their son, seeing her sing softly to him or smile at his tiny expressions, Quinton fell in love with her all over again, even more deeply than before. And when James would grip his father's finger in his tiny fist or settle to sleep on his father's chest, Quinton felt his heart expand in ways he had not known possible. As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and red, they settled into new rhythms as a family. Quinton continued to build the ranch, hiring seasonal help when needed, slowly expanding his herd and his reputation as a reliable cattleman. Tabitha managed the household and cared for James, but she also insisted on maintaining her own projects, her garden and chickens, the small enterprises that gave her purpose beyond motherhood. On their first wedding anniversary, Quinton surprised Tabitha by taking her into Spokane for a proper celebration, leaving James with Margaret Worth for the evening. They ate dinner at the hotel and walked through the town as the sun set, holding hands like young sweethearts. 1 year, Tabitha marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. The best year of my life, Quinton said firmly. Even counting all the sleepless nights and dirty diapers, Tabitha laughed. Mine too. I keep thinking about where I was a year ago, struggling alone, convinced I would always be that way. And now look at us. A family, a home, a future. All because I happened to ride past at the right moment. Quinton pulled her close. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help you that day. Best decision I ever made, saying yes when you proposed. She kissed him softly. Here is to many more years together, Quinton Irving. Many more years, he agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings. The ranch continued to grow, prospering through good management and hard work. They added more cattle, built better facilities, established relationships with buyers in Spokane and beyond. The income was never lavish, but it was steady and sufficient, allowing them to live comfortably and save for the future. 2 years after James was born, Tabitha gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, a tiny, delicate baby with her mother's dark hair and a surprisingly strong will. James, now a toddler, was initially uncertain about this interloper but quickly came to adore his little sister, always wanting to help care for her. 3 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas after Tabitha's father. He was the most easygoing of their children, content to watch the world with calm interest, rarely fussing or crying. The house that had seemed so spacious when it was just the two of them now rang with the noise and chaos of family life. There were always children underfoot, always laundry to be done and meals to be prepared and minor crises to be handled. But there was also laughter and love, the warmth of belonging to something larger than oneself. Quinton proved to be a devoted father, patient with the children's questions, and involved in their daily lives despite the demands of the ranch. He taught James to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and brought all 3 children with him on his rounds when they were old enough, teaching them about the land and the cattle, about responsibility and hard work. Tabitha found that motherhood suited her in ways she had not expected. She loved the chaos and noise, the constant demands and small joys. She loved watching her children grow and learn, loved seeing pieces of herself and Quinton reflected in their faces and personalities. As the children grew older, the ranch became more prosperous. Spokane continued to expand, providing a ready market for their beef. The railroad made it easier to transport cattle to distant markets, and Quinton's reputation for quality stock and fair dealing brought buyers from across the territory, and eventually the new state of Washington. In 1889, when Washington achieved statehood, they joined the celebrations in Spokane with their children, feeling pride in being part of this new chapter in the region's history. The wild frontier of their early years was gradually giving way to settled civilization, though the land retained its essential character, its beauty and harshness in equal measure. Through it all, Quinton and Tabitha's love for each other only deepened. They had their disagreements and frustrations, as any couple did, but they faced them together, never letting anger fester or resentment build. They had learned early on that their partnership was the foundation of everything else, that protecting and nurturing their relationship was essential to their family's well-being. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch they had added to the house, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about the day's events or simply enjoying comfortable silence. Quinton would take Tabitha's hand, marveling as he always did at how different his life had become since that autumn day he had stopped to help a struggling woman with her firewood. "You ever regret it?" Tabitha asked one evening, years into their marriage. The children were in bed, the ranch was quiet, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Proposing so quickly, tying yourself to me when you barely knew me." Quinton turned to look at her, seeing the woman he loved with even more depth than he had on their wedding day. She was older now, as was he, both marked by the years of hard work and child-rearing. But she was beautiful to him, more so than ever because he knew her completely, knew her strength and kindness, her humor and her steel. "Not for one single moment," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tabitha. You and our children, this life we have built together. I would not change a single thing. Not even the time James broke your favorite saddle trying to ride the neighbor's bull," Quinton laughed. "All right, maybe I would change that. But nothing important, nothing that matters." He pulled her closer, kissing her temple. "What about you? Any regrets?" "None. Even on the hardest days. Even when I am so tired I can barely stand, and the children are driving me to distraction, and the chickens have gotten into the garden again. I have no regrets. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible, Quinton. You gave me love and partnership and family. You saved me from a lonely, hard existence." "We saved each other," Quinton corrected. "I was just as lonely as you were, just as lost. We found each other at exactly the right moment." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, secure in their love and their life together. As their children grew toward adulthood, Quinton and Tabitha worked to prepare them for independence, while also hoping they would choose to stay close. James showed a natural aptitude for ranching and seemed content to follow in his father's footsteps. Sarah was academically inclined, with dreams of becoming a teacher, and they supported her ambitions even as Tabitha worried about her daughter leaving home. Thomas was still young enough that his future was uncertain, but he showed an interest in horses that suggested he too might find his calling on the land. By the turn of the century, the ranch had grown into a substantial operation, supporting not just their immediate family, but also employing several ranch hands during busy seasons. The name Irving had become respected throughout the region, synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing. Quinton and Tabitha took pride in what they had built, but they took even more pride in their family, in the strong, capable children they had raised together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, James having recently married and started a family of his own, they reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. 20 years, Tabitha said, shaking her head in wonder. "Sometimes it still feels like yesterday that you showed up at my cabin, offering to chop wood for a stranger." "Best day's work I ever did," Quinton replied, pulling her close despite the audience of family members. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Their children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' open affection, but there was fondness in the teasing. They had grown up watching their parents' partnership, seeing how love and respect could form the foundation of a strong marriage, and it had shaped their own expectations and relationships. As evening fell and their family gathered around the dinner table, the house filled with laughter and conversation, Tabitha looked around and felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was what happiness looked like, she realized. Not some grand, abstract thing, but this. A table full of people you loved, a home built by your own hands, a partner who had stood beside you through every challenge and celebrated every joy. After everyone had left and they were alone again in the quiet house, Quinton drew Tabitha into his arms and waltzed her around the kitchen, humming that same tune he had hummed while chopping wood all those years ago. "What are you doing?" Tabitha laughed, following his lead despite her protests that she could not dance. "Dancing with my wife, celebrating 20 years of the best decision I ever made." He spun her gently, then pulled her close. "I love you, Tabitha Irving, more now than ever." "I love you too," she replied, resting her head against his chest and feeling his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me when I was struggling and offering help without expectation. Thank you for asking me to marry you and giving me all of this. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher with more hope than sense." He kissed the top of her head. "Here is to 20 more years and 20 after that. As many as we are given," Tabitha agreed, "all of them together." They stood that way for a long moment, swaying gently in the lamplight. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful from their shared loneliness. Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying the promise of seasons yet to come, of challenges and joys still ahead. But inside, there was warmth and love and the profound peace of being exactly where they were meant to be, with exactly who they were meant to be with. The years continued their steady march, bringing the changes that time always brings. Sarah went away to Teachers College in Olympia, breaking her mother's heart a little even as they celebrated her ambition. She returned 2 years later with her degree and a young lawyer husband, settling in Spokane but visiting the ranch regularly. Thomas developed his interest in horses into a thriving business breeding and training stock for the growing number of ranches in the region. James took over more and more of the ranch operations as Quinton's hair turned gray, and his joints began to protest the hard work of his younger years. Quinton and Tabitha gradually transitioned into the role of grandparents, delighting in the next generation without the full-time responsibility of raising them. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly, filling them with sweets and stories, teaching them the skills and values that had served their own family so well. On their 30th anniversary, they renewed their vows in a simple ceremony at the same church where they had married, with Reverend Matthew's successor officiating and their entire extended family in attendance. It was Tabitha's idea, wanting to mark 3 decades together with a formal recognition of their enduring commitment. "I, Quinton Irving, take you, Tabitha Foster Irving, to be my wife for whatever years remain to us," Quinton said, his voice still strong despite his years. "I promise to love you as I have loved you, to stand beside you as I have stood beside you, to be your partner and your friend until death parts us." Tabitha, her dark hair now streaked with silver but her eyes still bright with life and love, made her own vows with equal conviction. "I, Tabitha Foster Irving, take you, Quinton Irving, to continue as my husband, my partner, my greatest blessing. I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life, as I have done these 30 years and will do for however many more we are granted." There was not a dry eye in the church as they kissed to seal their renewed vows, and the celebration afterward was joyous and heartfelt. As they entered their 60s, Quinton and Tabitha finally began to slow down, allowing their children to take over most of the ranch operations while they focused on smaller tasks and advisory roles. They spent more time together, taking gentle rides through the valley, working side by side in Tabitha's much-expanded garden, sitting on the porch in comfortable silence or animated conversation as the mood struck them. "You remember that first day?" Tabitha asked one autumn afternoon, so similar to the day they had met that it brought memories flooding back. When you saw me struggling with that branch, every detail, Quinton replied. I remember thinking you looked so small and determined, refusing to be beaten by something twice your size. I remember deciding in that instant that I was going to help you and how that simple decision changed my entire life. I was suspicious of you at first, Tabitha admitted with a smile. I thought you must want something that no one helped for free, and I just wanted to help. Well, that is not entirely true. Quinton took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. Even then, I think I knew you were special. I think some part of me recognized you as the person I had been waiting for all my life. That is very romantic for a practical rancher, Tabitha teased gently. You have made me romantic. 37 years of loving you has done that. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. Best decision I ever made, chopping that wood and asking for your hand. Best decision I ever made, accepting your proposal after knowing you for 3 days. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Everyone thought we were crazy. We were crazy, but we were also right. Sometimes you just know, and we knew. As the sun set over the mountains they had called home for nearly 4 decades, Quinton and Tabitha sat together in perfect contentment, watching the sky blaze with color. Around them, the ranch they had built together continued its operations under their children's capable management. Inside the house, photographs chronicled the life they had lived, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through everything. They had started with nothing but loneliness and a pile of firewood, and they had built an empire of love. Not an empire of wealth or power, but something more valuable. A family rooted in affection and respect, a partnership that had weathered every storm, a legacy of hard work and integrity that would continue long after they were gone. No regrets. Quinton asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. Not a single one, Tabitha replied, as she always did. You. Only that I did not find you sooner, but I found you when I needed to, when we both needed each other most. So maybe the timing was perfect after all. The timing was perfect, Tabitha agreed. Everything was perfect, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because we faced them together. They sat in silence as the stars began to emerge, two people who had taken a chance on love and been rewarded beyond measure, who had built a life of meaning and joy from the simple foundations of kindness and courage and hope. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed as they settled for the night. This was home. This was love. This was the life they had chosen and built and cherished together, and it was more than enough. It was everything. As Quinton and Tabitha entered their 70s, they became the beloved patriarchs of a sprawling family that now included not just their 3 children but numerous grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had expanded beyond anything they had imagined in those early years, but it remained a family operation, with multiple generations working together to continue the legacy they had established. Though age slowed them physically, their minds remained sharp and their devotion to each other unwavering. On the rare occasions when one fell ill, the other was a constant presence, providing care and comfort with the same tenderness they had shown each other throughout their marriage. On their 50th wedding anniversary, a celebration unprecedented in their family's history, the entire clan gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out onto the grounds. Friends and neighbors from across the region came to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the area. Their love story told and retold as an example of how taking a chance on love could transform lives. At the height of the celebration, James stood and raised his glass. To my parents, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Who taught us all what love looks like? Who showed us that hard work and devotion and choosing each other every single day can build something that lasts not just years but generations? Who started with nothing but each other and created all of this? He gestured to encompass the family, the ranch, the life they had built. Happy 50th anniversary, Mom and Dad. We love you. The toast was echoed by dozens of voices, and Quinton and Tabitha stood together, tears streaming down their weathered faces, overwhelmed by the abundance of love surrounding them. 50 years, Tabitha whispered to Quinton as they stood together before their family. How did we get so lucky? We were not lucky, Quinton replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. We were brave. We took a chance when we barely knew each other, when everyone said we were foolish. We chose to believe that what we felt was real and worth pursuing. And then we worked every day to make our marriage strong, to keep choosing each other no matter what life threw at us. That was not luck. That was love and determination and grace. The party continued long into the night, filled with music and laughter, stories and dancing. But eventually, the crowd dispersed and Quinton and Tabitha were alone again, sitting on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the stars wheel overhead. 50 years, Quinton said, marveling at the passage of time. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I still feel like that young woman struggling with firewood, wondering how I was going to survive the winter alone. And then I look around and see all of this, and I can hardly believe it is real. Tabitha squeezed his hand. You saved me, Quinton. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. We saved each other, Quinton insisted, as he always did. I was drowning in loneliness, and you threw me a lifeline without even knowing it. We built this life together, Tabitha. Every bit of it together. They sat in comfortable silence, and Tabitha thought about the journey they had taken. From that first meeting to this moment, spanning half a century, they had faced countless challenges. Harsh winters and drought years, sick children and financial worries, injuries and losses and all the normal struggles of life. But they had faced everything together, their partnership unshakable, their love providing strength when they needed it most. I would do it all again, Tabitha said softly. Every single moment, even the hard ones, because they all led to us, to this family and this life. I would choose you again, Quinton Irving, every single time. Quinton turned to her, and in the starlight she could see tears on his cheeks. And I would choose you. In every life, in every world, I would find you and choose you. You are my everything, Tabitha. You always have been. They kissed then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 50 years of love and devotion, of partnership and passion, of choosing each other day after day, year after year. And as they drew apart and settled together to watch the night sky, they knew that their story had come full circle, from lonely individuals to a partnership that had created a legacy of love. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down through generations. Their children and grandchildren would tell stories about them, about the lonely rancher who saw a woman struggling with firewood and decided to help, about the bold proposal after only 3 days, about the love that had built something lasting and beautiful. But for now, in this moment, they were simply Quinton and Tabitha, two people who had found each other at exactly the right time, who had taken a leap of faith and been rewarded beyond measure. They had built a life together from nothing but determination and love, and it had been more than enough. It had been everything. As the years advanced and they moved into their late 70s, Quinton's health began to fail. The years of hard physical labor took their toll, and he developed a persistent cough that worried them all. But even as his body weakened, his devotion to Tabitha never wavered. On the days when he felt strongest, he would still walk with her through the garden she had tended for so many years, still sit beside her on the porch, still reach for her hand whenever she was near. Tabitha, for her part, refused to treat him as an invalid despite the family's concern. She knew Quinton's pride, knew he wanted to remain himself for as long as possible, and she honored that wish even as she watched carefully for signs he needed help. One evening, as they sat together watching yet another sunset, Quinton turned to her with unusual solemnity. "Tabitha, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," she replied, though fear clutched at her heart. She knew what conversations that began this way usually meant. "When I am gone, and I know that day is coming sooner rather than later, I need you to keep living. Really living, not just existing. Our children will want to take care of you and you should let them, but do not let grief consume you. Keep your garden, keep your routines, keep finding joy in the world. Promise me." Tabitha felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Quinton, do not talk like this." "We have to talk like this. We have been blessed with so many years together, more than many people get, but we are not immortal. My body is wearing out, and we both know it." He took both her hands in his, holding them firmly despite the tremor that now affected his grip. "You gave me the best 53 years of my life. You loved me and stood beside me and made every day worth living. I do not fear death, because I have lived so fully. But I need to know you will be all right." "I will never be all right without you," Tabitha said, the words torn from her heart. "You are part of me, Quinton. You have been for more than half my life. I do not know how to be without you. You will remember how. You were strong before we met, and you are stronger now. You will grieve, and that is right and proper. But then you will keep going because that is who you are." "Promise me, Tabitha." Through her tears, she nodded. "I promise. But you have to promise me something too. Promise me you will fight, that you will not give up while there is still life in you to live." "I promise. Every day I have left is a gift, and I will not waste a single one." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Tabitha tried to memorize everything about this moment. The feel of his arms around her, the sound of his heartbeat, the scent of him that had been familiar for so many years. She knew that time was finite, that they could not hold it back no matter how much they wanted to, but she could hold these moments close, could treasure each one. The winter was hard, and Quinton's health continued to decline despite everyone's efforts. But he remained himself, his mind clear even as his body failed. He spent as much time as possible with his children and grandchildren, sharing stories and advice, making sure they knew how much he loved them and how proud he was of the people they had become. And every night, no matter how tired or ill he felt, he made time for Tabitha, for the conversations and quiet companionship that had sustained them through more than 5 decades together. On a cold February morning, with snow falling softly outside and the whole family gathered around, Quinton Irving passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Tabitha holding his hand as she had held it countless times throughout their marriage. The grief was profound and encompassing, shared by everyone who had known and loved him. The funeral drew people from across the region, all coming to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his hard work, and most of all, his devotion to his family. Through it all, Tabitha moved with quiet dignity, accepting condolences and supporting her grieving children even as her own heart shattered. She had lost more than her husband. She had lost her partner, her best friend, the person who had known her better than anyone else ever could. In the weeks that followed, the house felt impossibly empty despite her children's constant presence. She would turn to share something with Quinton and remember with fresh pain that he was gone. She would reach for him in the night and find only emptiness. The world had lost its color, its warmth, and she wondered how she could possibly keep the promise she had made. But slowly, gradually, she found her way back to living. Her children supported her without smothering her, understanding that she needed space to grieve in her own way. She returned to her garden as spring arrived, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of planting and tending. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, seeing Quinton's legacy living on in their faces and mannerisms. And every evening, she would sit on the porch they had shared for so many years and talk to Quinton as if he were still beside her, telling him about her day, about the family news, about how much she missed him but how she was keeping her promise to keep living. One day, nearly a year after Quinton's death, Tabitha's youngest great-grandson asked her about the story of how she and great-grandpa had met. She had told the story many times before, but never since losing Quinton, and she hesitated, unsure if she could bear it. But the child looked at her with such innocent interest, such genuine curiosity, that she found herself beginning the tale. "It was autumn, 1883, she began, and the words came easier than she expected. "I was struggling to drag a heavy branch, trying to prepare enough firewood for winter. I was alone, my uncle had passed, and I did not think I could manage on my own." As she told the story, she felt Quinton's presence more strongly than she had in months. She could almost hear his voice, see his smile, feel his hand in hers. The story brought him back to life in her memory, vivid and real, and she realized this was how he would live on, in the stories told by those who loved him, in the legacy of the family they had created together, in the love that had transformed both their lives so completely. "And did you live happily ever after?" the child asked when she finished. "We did," Tabitha replied, smiling through the tears that slipped down her weathered cheeks. "We had 53 beautiful years together, and I am grateful for every single one. Your great-grandfather was the best man I ever knew, and loving him was the greatest adventure of my life." As the child ran off to play, Tabitha sat back in her chair and looked out over the valley, the ranch, the land that she and Quinton had built into something meaningful and lasting. She missed him with an ache that would never fully heal, but she also felt profound gratitude for the life they had shared. They had started with nothing but loneliness and a pile of firewood, and they had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Quinton was gone, but what they had created together lived on. In their children and grandchildren, in the stories told around family tables, in the very land itself that bore the mark of their partnership. She kept her promise to him, living fully even in grief, finding joy where she could and cherishing the memories of their years together. And every evening, as the sun set over the mountains, she would sit on their porch and feel his presence beside her, his hand in hers, his voice in her ear telling her that he loved her still, that their love transcended even death, that they would be together again someday. For now, she had the life they had built, the family they had created, and the memories of a love story that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into something extraordinary. It was more than enough. It was everything. And when Tabitha herself passed away peacefully in her sleep 4 years later, at the age of 82, surrounded by family in the house she and Quinton had built together, everyone said she went with a smile on her face, finally reunited with the man she had loved for more than half a century. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the valley, and their graves became a place where family members would come to reflect on the power of love, the importance of taking chances, and the beauty that could grow from the simplest acts of kindness. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, who never forgot the story of how it all began. With a lonely rancher who saw a woman struggling with firewood, who chopped a winter's worth and asked for her hand, and who received in return a love that would echo through generations and inspire everyone who heard their story to believe in the transformative power of love, courage, and choosing to help a stranger in need.